Alrighty, so we're on to our next panel now, and we will ask our panelists and our host to come up to the stage, please, and take your seats. This next panel, regionalisation. Aisha Buttrose talked about how the ABC even has a series called Moving to the Country. Everyone seems to be wanting to do it at the moment, largely driven by the pandemic as businesses embrace all this, new ways of working from home, working for the regions. Australians are making that break for the bush. So how do we capitalise on this trend with a holistic regionalisation agenda? To discuss all this and more, Tom Connell, Sky News host, will be moderating the next panel, which includes Jane Kay down the end there from Birdsnest in Cooma, an online fashion business based in regional New South Wales. Birdsnest employs over 140 locals in a town of just... We're very privileged to have Fiona joining this panel too. Sorry, Jane. So Jane is, as I said, the founder and CEO of Birdsnest. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, an online fashion business down south in Cooma in New South Wales. It employs more than 140 locals in a town of just 6,500 people, and it's 30 times bigger now than it was when it was founded back in 2008. And 95% of Birdsnest's revenue relies on the digital economy. Jane's been a board member on Jobs for New South Wales, and before that she was a founding board member of the National Online Retailers Association. We also have on our panel Rachael Sweeney, the Executive Officer of Regional Capitals Australia, a national organisation focused on the development of regional cities. Rachael's also been the Strategic Communications Manager for two of Australia's largest public infrastructure projects, and she's held senior consulting roles focused on regional development issues. Liz Ritchie is the CEO of the Regional Australia Institute. She's a leader, a marketer, a researcher and a passionate advocate for regional Australia, heralding all the way from Deniliquin in New South Wales. No doubt knows about the Ute muster then. She's designed and executed programs across Australia to engage in economic and social issues affecting our regions. And in case you missed it, we've also got Fiona Simpson, the President of the National Farmers Federation, on this panel to be hosted by Tom Connell. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Yeah, Fiona was sitting down there thinking, what a great panel. I'm sure she thinks it's even better now that she's on it. It was lovely of her to join us. No, but thank you. It's a great conversation because it's something since I've started in Canberra. Initially, the conversation was how can we get people back to the regions? Now everybody wants to go. So it's about making sure we do it the right way, I suppose. I'll start with you, Fiona, because you've got this 20 regional hub plan you've put out there. The government's budget had a 4-hub plan that it focused on. What did you make of that? I guess what was behind your idea and what have you make of what the government's put down so far?
Yeah, look, we think they can do better. And I think going back a few years now, and one of my press club addresses was focusing and congratulating them on their regional deals. And just like a lot of other plans, I think there's been some good intent there, but they actually need right now to seize the day and to do it because the things are lining up and we have the opportunities now that I really don't think we're going to have again. And so yes, look at the four hub deal. Okay, that's something. But in actual fact, is it going to be strategic enough? Is it going to be wide enough? Is it going to be lasting enough? Is it addressing some of the real opportunities that we have right across Australia now? And I think we need to be bold. Right now we have unprecedented demand for living in the regions. We have unprecedented interest in some of our industries. We have an enormous amount of interest in doing things locally. We have people who are embracing what we offer. But if we don't have a plan to strategically develop these regions, and so that is looking at health, industry, transport, infrastructure, communications, all the things that need planning, and we do it in a sustainable fashion, Tom, then we risk replicating what some of the disasters have been in the cities, and we have right now the opportunity to do it right in the sustainable framework. And why stop at 4? I haven't had a good look at some of the factors around, what they were implementing in those regions. But let's pick a bigger number. Let's go for 20. Let's be bold. Let's give the local government and the local people the resources to help drive that development, because it has to be locally driven. But then that will give industry the impetus, with a framework that gives state government the opportunity to invest as well. That will give industry the impetus to invest and be confident in that investment as well.
The dollar spend seems pretty high from the government. Is it too simplistic to say they've simply put too many dollars into these 4 and you could put a similar amount of money and spread it out further? Is it that simple?
Well, we think that you actually need to spread out the dollars. So we've actually recommended that the dollars be spread in the first instance, the 1.4 billion, across the 20 regions, so that actually can then enable them to have access to some really good planning, some really good expertise that often local governments and regions don't have. And it's that sort of work that you actually need to do if you're going to really drive development in the region. If you're going to look at what, holistically this morning I said, if you're going to look at what that region actually does best, if you're going to look at some of the opportunities for that region, and if you're actually going to make a really good fist of trying to develop that region to its absolute maximum opportunity. And so initially, let's not throw too many dollars at each region. Let's let the local people drive that consultation. Let's make sure they have access to expertise, because it should be supported by a framework. It doesn't need to be top down. It needs to be bottom up, but supported by some of the resources that we certainly have in the cities and in other areas. And then let's see where we go from there. But let's look widely. Australia is very diverse. We think agriculture is very diverse. We think there's huge opportunities in some of the 20 that we've named for their agricultural opportunities. But obviously there's, probably, as I said this morning, 20 after that and another 20 after that. But let's just be bold and get on with it. Let's strategically pick regions, and let's strategically plan for the growth of those regions.
Rachael, your organisation lists 51 capitals, if you like, regional capitals. Is there a danger if you only pick 4 and really boost them with a lot of money, you end up with similar problems in the capital cities? And if you just go down the path of 4, you're not actually spreading, if you like, populations and opportunity enough.
Well, our members are all ready to grow, and I think that's the most important part of what Fiona was sort of saying is we understand that there will be lists, but make no mistake that the 50-odd members that we have in regional capitals are all ready to grow, but also are actually all growing. And not, if you move from a capital, a Melbourne or a Sydney, you're going to be looking for something different. You might want to be quite close to the capital city, so maybe some of those in the sort of 2-hour drive train journey is going to be for you, and maybe you're looking for a real sea or tree change, or maybe you're looking to get into the mining industry. But one thing for certain is all our members can grow, and they've sort of got the plans in place to do so. What they really need is government to back them and start putting those key pieces of infrastructure in place.
So would that be overall a disappointment as well, that 4 have been selected from your point of view?
Well, I mean, obviously, some of the 4 that were named were part of our membership, so we would never say disappointed. But I think, and in addition to that, the 20 that the NFF have also picked were also our membership, which, we really do think that despite what list, a city may be on, the reality is they all have plans to grow, and what they really need is a strategic pipeline of funds and also plans, infrastructure plans to enable that growth to occur. So road, rail and air is, fundamental to every single regional city.
Liz, interested in your thoughts. The Move to More campaign has been yours, and I wonder if almost you've switched from targeting people to targeting governments and making sure people are moving to an area that can still provide for them and give them the change they were looking for.
Thank you. Look, I wouldn't say that we've necessarily switched, but if I could just add to the last comments, I think Fiona's commentary there around looking to a longer term plan is really, really important, and we congratulate the NFF on the work that they've done on regionalisation. Of course, investment is absolutely critical at this time, but I think what we'd like to see is a much broader, longer-term plan in place. And actually last week we've launched our own National Regionalisation Framework consultation paper called Rebalancing the Nation. And I guess that the purpose of this report is to recognise that we need to get beyond electoral cycles and beyond annual budgets and look to the longer term plan of what we want our nation to look like and how we can start to, future-proof a better future for all Australians, which includes our people who call regional Australia home. In terms of the move to more, it's still as important and critical as it was a year ago when we launched it. We've got more than 70,000 jobs vacant at the moment across regional Australia, and the predominant number of those jobs is in professional, well-paid skills. If we don't get those skills out in the regions, our regions cannot grow. So we really need to look at this from a holistic sense.
So let's bring in the case study, Jane, and I might have a bit of
the dream.
I might have a jump off with a question that I've got from the audience saying that people might be ready to go, but the regions are not in a position to accept them, shortage of accommodation, poor telecommunications. Without these, we can't attract and retain people. What's your experience on that side of moving regional?
Well, so I live just an hour south here. Well, our business is there, and then our home is 65 k's south of that on a sheep farm. So I can say that our marriage and our business has been pretty reliant on the internet, and we have a lot of aerials on our roof, and we're always at least connected to 2 different telecommunications providers just in case one goes down, and it has held up since we moved there in 2002. So where there's a will, there's a way, generally, but there of course are some completely black spots, and there's no way that we can support a truly regionalised workforce if we don't have equal access to fast internet and, reliable reliable phone services. So I think, we are seeing the huge demand for a tree change, hence why we're here talking about this today. Effectively, I've been living the dream since 2002. I get to live in the slow lane and still work in the fast lane in a very internationally competitive industry, and with roles in our team that you wouldn't expect to find in a town of 6,500, from digital marketers to software engineers to fashion designers, all working in a little country town. So it is possible to make it work, and we have made it work, and we've got over 150 really happy team members who've chosen to make our little town their home and raise their families and make a life. So it's possible, but yes, we need things, and I think depending on your industry, you need the right infrastructure. So for a business like ours, we're a shipping business effectively. We have a warehouse of dresses just down the road, and when a girl orders a dress today, she really wanted it yesterday. It's very important we get it there tomorrow. And so for us, of course, that postal network being an hour from, just an hour south of the capital means we could tap into that express network, and through our relationship with Australia Post means that's been a huge part of the success and the growth of our business, is just having that infrastructure available to us, and that service available to us means we've been able to offer a really reliable service to women, that we're not going to let them down when that wardrobe dilemma happens and they need that dress for this event.
I've had a wife who, during maternity leave, it was COVID during maternity leave, so I heard all about the good delivery times and the not so good delivery times,
that's
and
right.
It made a big difference. So Fiona, on communication, which is a huge part of moving there, running a business in particular, you've got a $5 billion call for a rural telecommunications fund. The promise today, as far as I saw it, was $400 million from Labor. That seems a fair way short.
Yeah, it is. And look, we haven't got promises on the table from everybody yet. But look, the digital divide is real, and it's actually widening. That's the scary thing. So, with a lot of the services in the bush, and I spoke about it this morning, we have to be real about this. We all love living in the bush. We think that we wouldn't live anywhere else. But we have to be real about some of the challenges. And digital availability, affordability, connectivity. We're now carrying, whether you're working on a farm or whether you're in a business like Jane's, we need a lot of data. and the mobile network, the mobile black spots, which is something that we continue to focus on because it is about mobile phone coverage as well as we're driving around, is just not equipped to carry the sorts of data loads that we're going to need for the next century, right through to 2030 and beyond. So, but we are in this amazing, era of technological change. And Andy Penn spoke this morning about some of the low orbiting satellites and different forms of connectivity that we could have now. But we're going to need spend, and we're going to need commitment. And it's not just enough to commit to 80% of the homes or 90% of the homes or 95% of the homes, because we're in a country where 45% of our population lives in Sydney and Melbourne. 68% live in the major capitals. So we do need a commitment that when we're talking about things like, say, a universal service obligation, we need to understand what that looks like with current technology. What does that look like in terms of, if copper line is no longer a thing because it's just too old and there's better technologies, well, what is the next thing and how do we get it in regional Australia?
Does it shift when you talk about those new types of tech to individual subsidies get there rather than the government sort of putting in all the infrastructure? Is that the sort of shift in mindset? Or?
Well, I think we need to have a mindset about connecting everybody, doing it affordably and doing it reliably, and then we have to look at how we're going to do that. And until we can do that, then, that's part of the planning. Liz said it shouldn't happen overnight. It's not just a one-off. And unfortunately, it does seem that we get to elections and we just have this conversation again, and it never goes on to the next stage. So, it's really important that whoever forms government next, this is, I have to say, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Right now, these are, regionalisation and building the regions and properly planning the regions will not only help assist with some of the management of our natural resources. We're moving towards a low-carbon economy. We've got, erratic weather, the whole thing. But it'll be a win-win for the cities as well because, unprecedented population pressures in the cities. We've got these opportunities in the region, but there is some things we're going to need to do there, and connectivity, Tom, and addressing that digital divide is one of them that we're absolutely going to have to get on top of, particularly on farms.
Another big one often mentioned, Liz, is access to any different form of medical treatment, medical support, etc. And it's something that you hear the government talk a lot about, but what's the reality on the ground? Is that another disappointment for some people moving to the regions and almost a bit of a surprise at what's available?
Look, I think it's clear. Coming back to, I guess, what we're trying to achieve through rebalancing the nation and our regionalisation work, we want to make sure that people who choose to make regional Australia home have equal access to health and medical services. And we know that there is a divide, just like the digital divide. So we have work to do when it comes to health and health services, and the government know that there's more that needs to happen. I think, we are living in the regional renaissance, and, I like to term it as the great regionalisation as opposed to the great resignation, because as of last week, we've seen from the latest ABS statistics, for the first time since records have been kept, that our collective capital cities population has declined for the first time, while our regional population across the country has grown. So we are in uncharted waters, and it's critical at this time as we lead to an election that we get the level of investment behind these services, such as digital, such as broader infrastructure, such as health services and community services and education.
And the other one is housing, Rachael. So a lot of people think, wow, isn't it great? I'm going to move to this huge property and it's not going to cost much. The reality is changing. And it's also having an effect on locals who are competing with, I suppose you'd call it, city money, if you like. How big an issue is that at the moment?
Well, I'm actually one of those people. So I was based in Melbourne, and actually prior to COVID, I moved to my country town, where I grew up, Wagga Wagga. And I probably was one of those people that took one of the houses that were on the market. But I think the key kind of point is that, and we at Regional Capitals had this conversation prior to COVID arriving on our shores, was we know, and have known for a while, that people want to live in regional cities. There's no doubt about it. The lifestyle is good, and as long as the enabling pieces are there, they are going to continue to make that choice. I think the problem obviously is that COVID did accelerate that particular impact, if you like, and I know that, all our members are now really focused on the task of making sure that there is appropriate housing that exists. And I think one of the challenges for regional cities will be about density. So how do we, start to look more about how we make our cities a more sort of not your standard 3-bedroom with a large backyard, but, different sorts of accommodation that are available for people. We will continue to work with the state and the federal government around those key challenges, but really the land is there and the will is there, and I think at the moment we are just facing a particular crunch.
The land and the will, that's interesting. The federal government constantly says it's a land supply issue. So state and local councils, and if it gets freed up, it's all solved. Do you agree?
I don't think it's all solved, and I think there are some major challenges associated with the enabling pieces to get the land ready to build on. And I think in regional areas, builders haven't always seen the dream, I suppose, that they can make the money that they can do in the metro areas. I think there is a turning tide on some of those issues as well. But there's just no doubt that and I think one of the greatest things about regional cities, and when you're thinking about planning, a nation, is the urban growth boundaries of Melbourne and Sydney are just seas of houses, with nothing else really around them to make them livable.
And a long way from Melbourne anyway.
And a long way from Melbourne. And I think, what regional cities have always brought to the table is, while they don't have the scale and maybe the level of investment that you might see in Metro Sydney or Melbourne, they do have hospitals, they do have schools, they do have universities, they do have TAFEs, they do have shopping strips, they do have pools and art centres and everything that you might want, so that you don't actually have to contribute to that, run into Sydney or Melbourne in the morning where you're sitting in traffic for, 2 hours sometimes, return trip. And I think that's why people are sort of looking at our member cities now and saying, well, where can I get my family into one of these cities? Because the reality is the life is good, as everyone can attest to up here.
I imagine there's a lot of people on those long commutes over the past few years that have made the decision there and then they're going to get out of those cities. Jane, I know you're very glass half full, so feel free to inject some positivity within this, but I am going to ask about technically a negative. A hire you missed out on. It was about accommodation and getting the right access to medical professionals. So talk us through that sort of dilemma for you. Okay,
so at the moment, we're living in Cooma, whose population has pretty much increased by 25% due to the Snowy 2.0. So it's like an accelerated version, if you like, of regionalisation. So I think it's 1,800 workers, and they're the directly employed ones, not even the subcontractors. So it could be more than that. So as a result of that, it equates to something like 2.2 million meals for the year, and of course you can imagine how many houses they need in a town that was already pretty full. So we are definitely no vacancy signs in Cooma at the moment, and that's anywhere, because we fly models down quite often to take shoot, like trying to even get them a bed just for a night is interesting. And yes, as you say, I did miss out on one really key hire. It was with amazing digital skills out of Melbourne, who flew all the way to Cooma and had a regional background and was very keen to move to a regional space, but her expectations around housing were just not met when she got there, and for her and her partner, and they also had a child with special needs. So in the end, the services that she needed for her family and that she could make. But can I now say the plus about that? Because, at one point last year I could say, our last 6 hires were from, I think we had someone from Sri Lanka, India, Argentina, Panama, China, and South Africa at one point was in a row, and all of these people were here because they had partners that were in Snowy 2.0 and with really incredible skills that we needed, like software engineers and UX experts and software testers. So, you know, and I guess what we're seeing in town is, you know, the increased investment and the dollars that are circulating, and businesses feeling confident investing in their own because there is a lot more money circulating in the economy. And yes, there are definitely short-term losers at the moment, and it's pain. There is pain, but I feel like that long-term. You know, Snowy's stepping up to create a whole lot of accommodation. We are going to be left, our area is going to be left with a whole lot more accommodation options than we had before. And that there are enough positives that I could talk to, which I'm not sure if we've got time to, but that outweigh the negatives of this little micro sort of example of mass regionalisation.
Well, apart from anything else, your Bring a Plate Day must be magnificent at work with all those cuisines, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah, no, and actually we realised, because Cooma obviously has a history of the Snowy Mountains scheme where the 100,000 people coming out in the 50s and 60s. So we're already an incredibly multicultural organisation. On Harmony Day, we worked out we had 18 different nations represented under our roof. So yes, of course, we have some pretty awesome bake-offs, which happen once a month. So yeah, you're welcome to come once a month. We celebrate the birthdays once a month because we used to celebrate them every day, and then whenever someone had a birthday, but then it got a bit intense. We were having one every second day. It was getting not good for the waistline, Fiona.
I might go to another question from the audience and ask you about this, Fiona. Talking about what sort of incentives and programs do we think are needed to be implemented to attract, train and also sustain quality professionals? So we're hearing some want to go, maybe it's a housing issue, perhaps it's an infrastructure issue. What do you think?
I mean, I think at the moment, when you're talking about incentives, I guess the person's perhaps asking about doctors and some of those professionals that we badly need in regional areas. And we're short of a lot of the things that we're short of in the cities as well, doctors and teachers and aged care workers and those sorts of people. But I think what we're talking about at the moment, actually, Tom, is that there is a huge demand for people to move out to the bush. It's actually just that there is no housing. There is, you know, some of these basic problems that we're having. Last year I was out in Winton, and they had a number of roles available in Winton for plumbers and electricians and nurses and doctors and, as you said, Liz, skilled roles. And I think it was mostly the fact that there was just no housing available, like your person, Jane. So I think, you know, is it about incentives? I think we need to look really strategically at the issue and not just jump to conclusions about, you know, how we get people there, but be really inventive about that and talk to the professionals as well about the lifestyle, but also I think reflect on the data. So the data I think tells us, and Liz will tell me if I'm wrong, that most people when they come to regional areas they stay for 7 years. And the 7 years, is that right, Liz?
Not sure where that one.
Oh, okay, I might have made that one up.
I want them to stay longer.
Okay, we definitely want them to stay longer, but the reason I thought it was about 7 years was because by then things like education, health, all those different things come into play. So, you know, I guess, Tom, for me, it's about, you know, let's look at the planning. Let's look a little bit more carefully at the planning stages. If we're wanting more housing, you know, let's enable local government and the local people to actually plan where the houses should go. Let's look at the environmental factors. Let's look at possible industries and local manufacturing and let's see how we can build those and what sort of demand those do. And let's actually map some data about how many houses we might need, where we should put them, where the industry is going to go, and then let's look then at incentivising, or if we need to, some of the workers that we're going to need to fill those jobs.
I think what's interesting about that, without whatever timeline, however long people do stay, is I've heard you talk before, Liz, around it's not about no one ever leaving regional areas. There's a bit of a rite of passage, but if people are going to come and go, it needs to be easy to come and go, whomever that may be. So it's got to be easy to get there, go to a regional place. Some churn is okay. You don't want a lot of it, but you need people to be able to feel they can leave and then come back.
Oh, absolutely. And that has been, I guess, a well-worn path of what we call regional returners, if you will. People who've grown up in the regions and have taken their rite of passage to move to the cities, and invariably they've had a deep desire to return to the regions. And I'm certainly one of those people. But I think where we are today is, as I said, we're in uncharted territories. This renaissance of the regions has come about in some ways as a silver lining as the impact of COVID. And if we're talking about skills and we're talking about the kind of work opportunities that we want to see in regional Australia, in this room we have a vast and diverse range of industry who have had to change their business models as a consequence of COVID. And at the Institute, we formed 2 years ago an industry council called the Regional Australia Council 2031. And we've now got 18 large corporate members who are working with us to ensure that the jobs that have been done flexibly throughout COVID will continue to be done flexibly. Now, this opens up the nation for employment, and this opens up the opportunities for people who have dreamt of getting back to the regions, but ensuring that their career, they can pursue the career that they've dreamt of and that their ambitions can be realised. So the issue that we have, and we're hearing this and we've surveyed our members, when we surveyed the 18 RAC members, we found that over 70% of those white-collared roles would be considering a move to regional Australia, but they need to have the ongoing support of a national employment market so that when the time comes that they want a career change, that they don't have to go back to the city. So we have to have a national approach to this.
So if I can ask you, Rachael, about, are there any regions in particular that are not being spoken about, that are not in plans, that you think are crying out for this sort of growth we're talking about, but just not getting on the map of whatever a bureaucrat of the day is drawing these things up?
Well, I guess a cheeky answer to that would be where the electoral boundaries sit. But the reality is, I think every single one of our members is reporting increased growth, and I think every single one of them, has highlighted the challenges around housing that they're seeking to sort of solve. But I just want to add to what Liz was sort of saying too, and I do think the big challenge will be, especially for regional cities have really tried to diversify their economies, which I think is starting to happen. But one of the big challenges with the work from anywhere movement will be around not just digital connectivity, but also physical connectivity as well. So in the outer suburban areas, you'll see people who are saying they're going to go in and work in their office for 2 days a week. But the reality for, say, from Wagga or Townsville or, even Karratha, if you were so desiring to do so, will be the ability to catch a train or catch an aeroplane somewhere. And if governments don't keep their very clear eye on that, that will be one, I believe, of the big things that will stop people because, as the workplaces start to open up again and people are thinking about returning to the office, if you can't catch a train or can't catch a plane to spend that day or, 2 days in the office, then I think that's going to be a major drag on what we're sort of seeing at the moment. So all of them have aspirations, as I say, to grow. All of them are growing. That they've got the ability to absorb more population, and that's certainly something we've been angling for a while. But it really is about making sure those connections exist, and not just digital connections as well.
So when you talk about all regions wanting growth, one question coming in, does every region want this growth though? Do we need to ensure locals have a say? And I guess that goes to not necessarily any growth at all, but some a bit worried about the pace of change and whether the housing market, whatever it might be, can handle it.
Well, I actually do think that there is an element where this debate will come up in our member cities, and I suspect it's probably going to come up sooner rather than later. But if you took, for instance, Wagga, where I live, there is no doubt you can see the pace is increasing, and some people enjoy that and some people don't. But an hour out of Wagga, say for instance, in one of the smaller towns out there, you're actually starting to see the growth occurring in those areas as well. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about regional areas is the diversity. So whatever you're looking for, you can actually obtain that. Tamora is one of those, so it's about an hour and a half out of Wagga. And I was quite shocked the other day when I went back, that's where my family's from, and I went back there and the main street was just humming on a Friday afternoon. And they've just had this amazing sort of investment from New South Wales Government where they're going to build this massive hospital which connects into the health precinct that Wagga has. And I think that's going to be the story, is that the connectivity that exists between what we call the regional capital, but also the changing story is often there was this suck from the smaller rural towns into the big capital cities, regional cities, but now we're starting to see that the growth is absorbed throughout the region, and I think that's what everybody really wanted, and now we're sort of, getting what we wanted.
So, Jane, manufacturing is the big conversation at the moment, supply chains, and we're all realising how fragile they are since COVID. You've expanded the amount in terms of onshore production within your business as you've gone. The obvious question always for people doing that is, does it cost more? So can you talk us through how you did that, and I'm not sure if they're state secrets, but what the sort of cost comparisons were as well?
I'm pretty much an open book, Tom. So we started as a traditional retailer of other people's products. So we were literally a little store in a country town selling R.M. Williams and Kubra hats and Levi's jeans. So, and then about just under 10 years ago, we realised we knew our girl pretty well and that we could start designing and manufacturing things for her in a much more inclusive size range as well. So we, it was very scary, I remember at that time, and at that time we were pretty much exclusively offshore. So we started in India because we started with beautiful prints and embroidery and things. So, and then really in the last 5 years we've developed this amazing relationship and doing a lot of our cut and sewing out of Sydney. Actually 50% of what we produce now is onshore. So, I feel like it's been quite serendipitous that we've just met this incredible couple of women that have been in the industry for a long time, who are very well connected. It's an aging industry. I mean, we're terrified because they're about to retire. If anyone really wants to go into clothing manufacturing in Sydney, please come and see me. And a lot of the beautiful, this is a dress that was sewn for me last week in Sydney that I was running to an event and I needed something really quickly, and she handed me this dress after she'd sewn it, and her skills are incredible. She's Vietnamese, and a lot of the people have come to Australia with these amazing skills. Their children are all doctors and lawyers, and we're just not sure what's going to happen to the next generation of this skill that we need to develop if we want to keep it here. Of course, a lot of what we do make, we bring the fabric in. So, our fastest growing label is a label called Natural for Birds. So you'd be very pleased to know it's all natural fibres, and that's the thing that our customers are demanding at the moment, and that's great. And we do source, for example, Australian wool for that, but we don't manufacture it here because the expectation around price point we just couldn't meet. I know there are successful stories around, I just learned about, is it Creswick Woolen Mills, incredible, and also based in regional Australia. I've only just recently learned about this amazing story. So maybe there's some more amazing stories, and it sounds like there's some investment being. We'll see. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not in the world of announcements, so I'm not sure what was exactly announced or not announced. Yeah, investment in that space. We need skills. We need to onshore it. We need more. We need to build the skills and the tech here to be able to do that. And I guess it's just a balance. We are living in a global world, so some things make sense to make here, some things don't.
So you need to pick the ones that are viable, but I suppose Cooma is an interesting example because it is sort of getting this very sudden growth, and it does
Yes.
strain a bit under it, but it also shows the opportunity. And you think of areas such as Shepparton and SPC, you know, manufacturing hubs, and why aren't we setting these up? And Cooma, you think in the glass half full style, shows that it's not easy, but it can be done. It's a pretty big sudden influx of people.
Yeah, incredible, which creates, you know, diversity in so many ways, not only culturally, but, you know, there's, you know, from an industry point of view, that where we rely on where we rely on tourism and, you know, agriculture to have, you know, this whole influx of different types of jobs, blue-collar jobs, white-collar jobs. You know, the kids that go to Monera High are getting a $47 million upgrade to their high school at the moment, and the incredible traineeships that are being offered that they can do while they're at school and get, you know, great skills through Snowy 2.0 and the other businesses that are in town. So it's you know, I see all positive with a little bit of pain short term.
And do you think though, because I do, that sometimes when people say they're nervous of growth, then they're nervous of some of the unplanned impacts of growth. When you have topsy-turvy unplanned growth, and then you suddenly have too many people, not enough houses, not enough health services, nothing's been able to be planned. So I guess what we're suggesting, Tom, is that we actually plan, and we're planning for precincts here. We're not planning for, you know, we're not saying tomorrow has to be a Wagga Wagga, or, you know, Prima, where I live, has to be a Tamworth. But I think we're looking holistically at the region. We're looking at all the opportunities there. A lot of the reasons that we don't manufacture a lot of things, a lot of the reasons, for example, we send every bit of cotton offshore to be milled, and then a lot of the time we bring it back as fabric, is because of some of the costs we have onshore. But if we now look at renewable energy, if we look at technology, look at a Tesla factory, for example, and how many people staff that, which is hardly any. You know, some of these things are worth another look in Australia as we start to develop some of those sorts of industries in Australia, and it's certainly the best time to do that and to plan to do that.
Well, even the cost of not producing AdBlue, for example.
Yep.
You think, well, it costs a bit to make. You think, well, the cost of not having it's...
That's exactly right. And I think, you know, everybody wants the cheapest. You know, if we're sourcing farm inputs or whatever it is, you know, people are wanting cheap things, but they're also wanting reliable things. They're also wanting good things. And we see now the government starting to invest in, you know, local fertiliser more and local inputs more. But we need to do that strategically. Where are the right places to place those? Where's the right places to place renewable energy hubs? Where are the right places to put, you know, those sorts of services? And environmentally as well. You know, where, you know, the regions are the right place to be putting some of these things. But how do we actually then plan for that? How can we help the town retain its character? And I think the main way of doing that is making sure that local people driving the development.
How would that work for your members, Rachael? Is that the right sort of approach? You can imagine some saying, this is our industry, we'd prefer this one, whatever it might be, and rather than just try to make a town based around a company, it has an industry like that.
So I think all regions do have their strategic advantage, and you've sort of just carved out, you know, quite a few of them there. And there's no doubt that the underpinning of most regional economies does come back to its strength, and then it's how you scale that strength and how you diversify it. And we've strongly supported the NFF's push for 20 precincts, and, you know, as you say, we'd like 42. But the reality is that, you know, that every region has its strength, and it does need the support to build on that strength, and then to value add, and then to diversify that as well. And there isn't one of our members who didn't, you know, when the deals model came out, go and do the work. They put in the effort to present to government their view about what a deal could look like. And so I personally believe all the plans exist, and now it's just time for action.
And if not now, when, I guess? Rachael or Liz, feel free to weigh in on that. But everybody's talking about vulnerabilities we have, things we were worried about if we'd had during COVID. COVID's still happening. There are variants. There's China.
I wasn't going to answer that. What I was going to touch on was the planning issue, and I want to come back to this on the housing, because this has been, you know, it's become a hot button issue. And when we think about planning, when we're talking about planning, there's been a failure to plan in terms of housing. We've actually had the data for the past 2 decades that has told us that housing supply has not kept pace with regional population growth. We've had that data, and we've been really slow to respond because we haven't invested and we haven't planned for what we've seen coming in terms of that regional population growth.
Is the main part of that strategic and enough land release in these areas, and if that had happened, the houses would be built, or does it go beyond that?
Look, I think it's a combination. I think, we launched a report last week called Building the Good Life, and what's really important when you're looking at the regional housing market is that it's not a homogenous market. There are very different drivers for different areas across regional Australia. So you've got, for example, the low growth inland market, and you've got the high growth sea coastal areas, and they require different measures. But certainly land release has a critical part to play.
And I guess potential shortages coming up with builders and flood repair and so on. Look, I might try to get a final sort of all-encompassing question to each of you. One wish to better vitalise our regions, and it might be from government, it might not be. I'll leave that open-ended. Anybody want to jump in first? If you one wish to, in terms of wanting to revitalise our regions, if you had something that you could make happen, a policy sense, whatever it might be, what would you pick?
I'd probably just like to make one point, which probably leads to what I would ask for. And if you take yourself back to 2019, a lot of the headlines that talked about, Australia and the nation, state of the nation, if you like, was really around how congested Melbourne and Sydney were. And, I think Infrastructure Australia has done many reports, but the figure that struck me was there was going, by 2030, which, let's face it, it's only sort of, 5-6 years away, they were going to have $53 billion worth of congestion costs just on our roads. COVID obviously has, in the sort of mindset of people, taken that sort of debate away, but the borders are opening and people will come back. And the thing that the call I've made and we continue to make is just make sure that we're balancing the population. Everything that we can do to enable regional growth should be occurring. There's 51 cities that we represent. Most of them, could absorb quite a large-scale amount of population, and we can't go back to focusing on problems where we've just, where the lens is through congestion. It needs to be about growth. And so a plan, and, our previous chair is now the chair of Infrastructure Australia, and we continue to sort of advocate the point that regional infrastructure needs its own pipeline, and there needs to be a line of sight and clear funding associated with that.
Briefly on that, are you worried there's going to be a permanent reduced migration intake, and that with the temptation with low unemployment, and that's where both parties might be pushed to go in?
Well, I think regional streams for visas are fundamentally important to the debate, and not just opening the floodgates and saying, everybody now needs to live in Sydney and Melbourne. Using the levers. Let's be honest. Government does have the ability to decide, where people can live, and that is through regional visas. They can say, you need to spend some time in the regional areas. That's not going to work across the board, but those levers are important to sort of helping to maintain that sort of level of regional growth, so we don't end up with everyone just living in Sydney and Melbourne again and dealing with the infrastructure budget largely going to deal with a problem which I personally think, is it's unsolvable. We'll never be able to build enough roads or rail in the metro area to stop congestion.
And once people move to the country, they'll fall in love with it, of course. Liz?
Of course they will.
What's on your wish list?
I'll be really short and sharp. I'd like to level the playing field. Regionalisation for us is about a more balanced, more equitable, more sustainable, and ultimately more prosperous nation. So that is the work of rebalancing the nation.
Short and sharp. Jane?
I won't attempt policy. What I love about the region and what I love about living in Cooma is I feel like, it's all about the people and the community, and I think it's such a opportunity to create the soil for, I feel like the culture that you're able to build in a business in a regional area is just incredible. And one of the best ways that the government has been able to help us in years that I would say we've very much stood on our own 2 feet, but whenever they can help around skills and training up our team and helping with apprenticeships and traineeships, that's I guess the one area where, because the more we can, our traineeship program where we have at least 10 school kids join us after school each year, it opens their eyes to what's possible in the region. So even if they do spend a year with us and then go off to university because they need to, because we don't have a university in our town, or they leave to study, they've had this sort of taste of what it's like to live and work in the country, and quite often we see them come back years later. So I think learning and growing in the country, then there's just this attraction to come back. So it's something in that space, but I won't claim to know how to do that.
Well, the good thing, Tom, is that the NFF has just put out their regional precincts plan, so all government needs to do is really accept that.
Holus bolus.
Holus bolus, go with it. Let's get it going. Let's work with it. There's so many local communities, as Rachael said, that are ready to go, ready to grow, ready, absolutely poised. In fact, way more than 20. But let's commit to it. Let's commit to instead of the industry and the state government and local government and federal government all, looking at each other and going, you go first, your jobs. Let's just get on with it. Let's set the federal framework. Let's pick the precincts. Let's commit to resourcing those local groups to really plan, and then let's just make the most of it.
I might sort of finish with a question and riff on that, because I'm just struck that you've got a call for $5 billion in telecommunications and you're getting 400 million put up. So, and this is partly from a question coming in, wouldn't it be great if as a nation we could commit to quantifying the inequalities between the bush and metro Australia and have a government that commits to reporting on it and closing the divide? Because in my experience, I've been on a few election campaigns, I've seen umpteen announcements of improving mobile black spots, but it doesn't seem to address the issue.
No, it doesn't. And I think one of the announcements we've heard today is around auditing, but I think it is about auditing mobile black spots. It has to be a bigger conversation than that, Tom, because our technology's moved on. We know now that we do need mobile coverage as we're driving around, and as we're visiting rural and regional areas. In my own area, we've had a great trial this year of bringing visitors out to farms, and they're absolutely hungry, driving up all the way from Sydney and the South Coast to be looking at what we're doing on our farms. And if they can't connect while they're there, it's an issue for them. But data is another thing, and having the ability to run your business, a business like Jane's, a business like mine, a business like a modern manufacturing business in a local area is going to require a lot more data than that. And I think we have technological solutions now that we need the backing. Let's implement the RTIRC recommendations, let's get a future fund in place, and let's start then planning how we can actually strategically provide that data coverage and really fill, what is the universal service obligation. What does that mean? It's not fair anymore, I don't think, that Telstra just has to bear that burden with copper lines. What does it look like? What does it really look like in this modern day, and can we implement that?
Well, I know we all dread electoral cycles. I shouldn't say that as a political journalist, but it is at least a time to try to get them to make some promises, so we'll see. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panellists.